Hello and welcome. I'm Nicola Maria Rose, the founder of HushAway and The PeacePath. This conversation is specifically for educators, teachers, TAs, SENCOs, anyone working with children in a school setting. And I know your time is precious, so I want to make sure that every minute of this is practical and useful. I'm joined by Mark Tew, our psychoacoustics analyst and sound frequency expert here at The PeacePath. And today we're exploring how solfeggio frequencies can be used in the classroom to support emotional regulation. Because here's what I hear from teachers constantly. Children are arriving dysregulated. Transitions are harder. The classroom soundscape itself is often part of the problem. So what can we do about it? Mark, I think this is probably a really good place for us to start. So let's start there. And a teacher told me recently that her biggest challenge isn't the lessons themselves or the classrooms themselves. It's actually the transitions. And it's something that you spoke about earlier. Getting children to shift from one activity to the next. It's like their nervous systems get stuck. So what's actually happening in that situation?
So what that teacher's describing is probably the single most misunderstood moment of the school day. Because from the outside, it looks like the child is being slow or defiant or not listening. Whereas from the inside, it's a nervous system that's in the middle of a complete neural reset. And for neurodivergent children, that reset is genuinely quite chaotic. So I'll try to explain what's happening sort of neurologically. When a child is focused on a task, reading, writing, building something, they've activated a specific attentional neural pathway. The pathway is engaged, the system is stable, and the child is functioning. Then we say, right, pack that up. We're doing maths now. And what we're asking the brain to do is deactivate the current pathway entirely and activate a completely different one, which to some neurotypical children, that's quite a simple switch. But for neurodiverse children, it's a full neuro transition. A 2025 neuroscience review described this process clearly. The transition between focused attention and new attention involves a brief burst of sympathetic activation, essentially a kind of micro flight or flight response before the new parasympathetic focus can engage. For neurotypical children, that burst is brief and the new pathway activates quickly. For neurodivergent children, that burst is prolonged and chaotic, and the old pathway doesn't necessarily disengage cleanly. The sympathetic spike is higher, and the new pathway takes significantly longer to establish. The child isn't being defiant, the brain is just stuck between gears. That's where it costs the classroom. A 2025 pilot across 8 UK schools found that transitions account for 40% of reported behavioural incidents, and 35% of teachers stress during the school day. 40%. That's nearly half of all behavioural management workload coming from the gaps between activities, not the activities themselves. So here's the practical piece. A 90-second frequency-based sound bridge before each transition. Fundamentally, that changes what's happening in the nervous system during that sort of reset. The structured frequency gives the brain's attention system something predictable to anchor to during that neural switch. Instead of the chaotic sympathetic spike, the system transitions more smoothly because the auditory input is providing the consistency while everything else is changing. The same pilot study found that structured 90-second sound supported transition, reduced the behavioral incidents during transitions by sort of 65, 70%. And average transition time decreased. So it went from like sort of 12 to 15 minutes down to 3 to 5 minutes. Well, that's a significant amount of time when we're talking about lesson time. And that's not a marginal improvement. I mean, we're talking about reclaiming 10 minutes of learning time at every single transition point across the day. And I think I'd like to frame this very clearly for teachers listening. This isn't extra work. It's 90 seconds. 90 seconds of frequency playing through a classroom speaker before you ask the children to change the activity. 90 seconds that prevents 10 minutes of behavioural fallout. I don't feel that that's an addition to workload. I'd say that was a preemptive reduction.
That's so interesting and so simple. So within the school environment, do you remember Assemblies? Remember those? And let's talk about that kind of whole school environment, because managing sensory chaos in large groups is really challenging for any kind of SENCO teacher, TA. Assemblies themselves are almost sensory pressure cookers. The noise, the crowds, the unpredictability. And it'd be really good to just understand how we can help neurodivergent children survive them. So a teacher that we work with said assemblies are an absolute nightmare. The whole school gathered, children sitting still, unexpected noise, and her neurodivergent kids completely shut down or go into a meltdown. So what can she do in a situation like that?
So first, I want to validate that teacher immediately because she's right. Assemblies are, from a nervous system perspective, one of the most dysregulated events in a school week. And I think we need to be honest about why, rather than just expecting neurodivergent children to deal with it. What an assembly is in sensory terms is you're taking a child whose nervous system is already working very hard to manage the classroom, is masking cortisol spikes, and you're moving them into a space with the entire school. The noise level jumps up dramatically. 2025 Applied Sciences meta-analysis measured whole school assemblies at 70 to 80 decibels on average, which significantly exceeds the optimal auditory threshold for neurodivergent children, which sits between sort of 55, 65 decibels for safe autonomic functioning. But it's not just volume, it's the sensory stack. Unpredictable sounds, child coughing, a door closing, a teacher raising their voice. There's no escape as well. The child is sitting in a fixed position with children on all sides. And the pressure to sit still, which requires conscious motor inhibition. You can't just get up and walk around using more cognitive resources than neurotypical children. There's crowding, which compresses personal space and increases tactile sensitivity. There's high arousal from the entire room because arousal is contagious. And a room of 300 children generates a collective nervous system energy that every child absorbs. For a neurodivergent child, that stack hits all at once. And the research confirms what teachers already see. Children in high noise whole group settings show measurable increases in threat detection, elevated cortisol, reduced facial expressivity, social withdrawal. The nervous system is literally pulling that child inward because outward is terrifying. It's way too dangerous. Now, we can make assemblies comfortable for neurodivergent children. And if I'm being honest, probably not entirely, but we can make them more comfortable. An assembly with 300 children will always be loud. It's more unpredictable than a classroom of 30 people, but we can significantly reduce the dysregulated impact. The most effective strategy is pre-assembly nervous system priming. So 15 to 20 minutes of frequency-based sound before the child enters the hall. This can happen in the classroom while the others are lining up or in a quiet space nearby. Research shows that this reduces assembly-related dysregulation by 50 to 60%. A child's nervous system arrives with a higher baseline of parasympathetic tone, which means it can absorb more of that sensory load before tipping into overwhelm. And that downstream impact is significant. 2025 UK survey found that 42% of neurodivergent children avoid or struggle through school assemblies, but schools that implement pre-assembly regulation saw increased assembly attendance and a 50 to 60% decrease in the subsequent behavioural incidents, not just during assembly, but afterwards, back in the classroom, back in the safer space, because when the nervous system doesn't crash during assembly, it doesn't carry that crash into the rest of the day. It could be the rest of the morning. For some children, the right approach might literally just be a flexible attendance, offering a quiet space as an alternative when the sensory load is too high. That's not exclusion. That's knowing your child well enough to recognize the cost outweighs the benefit. But for many children, just priming makes assembly genuinely accessible in a way that it wasn't before.
And so it sounds like creating those kind of quiet spaces and regulation areas in the classroom are really key, because it feels like regulation spaces need more than just a comfy corner. They need the right acoustic environment. And I was speaking with a teacher who'd set up a lovely quiet corner with cushions and dim lighting and books, but children still came out dysregulated. So what's missing from a sensory space that doesn't actually work?
So this is actually one of my favorite topics, because I see this mistake a lot. When we were looking at schools for our kids, they were talking through stuff and you've not quite got it. And I think the teacher in your example has done everything right. in intention, cushions, dim lighting, books, a designed calm space. But the problem is that she's addressed what the child sees and touches, not what the child hears. And the auditory environment is the single most important factor, whether a sensory space actually regulates or just relocates. Think about what a quiet typical corner is acoustically. It's still in the classroom or just off it. It's going to pick up hallway noise. It picks up the other children talking, it picks up the classroom hum, the projector, the heating system, fluorescent lighting buzz. All of the sensory overloaded issues are still there. The child is just sitting on a more comfortable position. A child sitting on a comfy cushion in a slightly dimmer light, but the auditory system is still processing exactly the same amount of sound environment that dysregulated them in the first place. So they come out still dysregulated, and the teacher thinks the quiet corner doesn't work. It's not that it doesn't work. It's that it's not it's acoustically incomplete. There was an applied science study in 2025 that measured this quite precisely. And sensory spaces in schools only reduce dysregulation when the acoustic environment is actively managed, like specifically. So when background noise drops to below 50 decibels and a consistent sound field is present. Visual and tactile only sensory spaces showed a 20% improvement in behavior. Acoustically designed spaces showed 50 to 60% improvement. I mean, that's a threefold difference based purely on what the child is hearing. So what does a properly designed regulated space sound like? So 3 things first: acoustic isolation, as much separation from the general classroom sound as possible. This doesn't mean building a soundproof box in the corner. It means positioning the space away from doors, away from the hallway, away from the equipment. Soft furnishings absorb sound. They have a higher absorption coefficient. So the cushions and curtains actually do help acoustically, not just visually. Second is consistent, gentle sound, a frequency-based soundscape playing at a low, steady level, not silence, because silence in a school is never true silence. It's the contrast between the quiet corner silence and the burst of noise from a child returning to the class creates its own transitional shock. A gentle frequency provides continuity. And then third, predictability. The sound environment should be the same every time the child uses a space. Their nervous system needs to learn that space equals safety and consistency. And that's how that association would form. The recovery data is compelling. Children who are dysregulated in a noisy classroom environment recover parasympathetic tone within sort of 8 to 12 minutes in an optimized quiet space below 50 decibels with frequency-based support. In a traditional quiet corner, that same recovery can take 30 to 45 minutes. And there's a difference between a child returning to learning before break and a child missing the rest of the morning. The efficiency argument matters for teachers too. There was a pilot in 2025 that found that schools with well-designed acoustic regulation spaces reduced teacher behavior management time by 25 to 30% and increased the instructional time by the equivalent amount. So the space doesn't just help the child who's using it, it frees up the teacher's time for everyone else as well. A well-designed regulation space reduces the need for adult intervention by like 40, 50%. It's an investment that pays off across the whole class, not just the one child.
And let's talk about mainstream schools versus maybe more specialist classrooms, let's say. Because more and more neurodivergent children are in mainstream classes, maybe not getting the support that they need. So how can we support them and support their success without kind of putting them out? And a teacher friend has got a mixed mainstream class, and she said she wants to include her neurodivergent children, but they're getting really overwhelmed by the general classroom sensory environment. So what practical steps can she take even within that mainstream classroom itself?
Yeah, I mean, this is a reality that most classroom teachers are living every day. They've got a class of 30 kids, several of whom are neurodivergent, and they want to include them meaningfully, not just have them present, but have them learning, participating, and thriving. And the instinct is often to look at the curriculum. Should I differentiate the work, reduce the expectations, provide alternative tasks? And those things have their place. But what the research consistently shows is that differentiation for neurodivergent children is far more about environment than curriculum. A 2025 educational inclusion study found that neurodivergent children in mainstream classes show 40 to 50% better academic outcomes and 60% better social outcomes when the classroom sensory environment is actively managed compared to standard classrooms. No curriculum change required. Same lessons, same learning objectives, same activities. The difference is literally just the environment. So what does active sensory management look like in practice? It starts with what I'd call a sensory environment audit. Walk through the classroom and notice what's happening in each sensory channel. Auditory, is there background noise from equipment, corridors, ventilation? How loud is the general hum? Visuals, are the walls covered in displays that create visual noise? Is the lighting harsh? Spatial, how close together are desks? Are children bumping elbows? Transition patterns, how many changes happen in a typical hour and how abruptly do those transitions arrive? You don't need to rebuild the classroom. I would say you need to identify these 2 or 3 sensory factors that are doing the most damage and just address those. Often it's simple things, moving a child's desk away from the corridor, turning off a strip of fluorescent lighting and using a lamp instead, reducing the volume of the end of letters signal. I mean, these cost nothing and benefit every child in the room, not just the neurodivergent ones. A study in 2025 across 25 schools confirmed this. Implementing classroom-wide sensory management strategies, noise reduction, visual support, consistent sound environment, cost minimal time and money, and the benefits extended to the entire class through improved focus, reduced behaviour incidents. This isn't like a special provision. It's just another way of looking at good classroom design. Individual neurodivergent children, there's an additional layer. Some children benefit from frequency-based support during the highest demand parts of the day. Independent work where they need sustained focus, transitions between activities, or group work where social processing load is intense. This can be as simple as a child wearing earbuds with the frequency-based soundscape during this window. It doesn't isolate them from the class. It gives their nervous system an anchor while they're navigating those demands. And the confidence data matters here. A study in 2025 found that teachers using structured sensory support strategies reported, I think it was a 45% increase in confidence supporting neurodivergent children and a 35% increase in reported successful inclusion outcomes. Teachers feel more capable, children feel more supported, and the classroom functions better for everyone. The key message is differentiation for neurodivergent children often means supporting their nervous system, not changing the curriculum. When the nervous system is regulated, the child can access the same learning as everyone else.
Absolutely. We've talked about transitions and we've talked about, mornings and coming from different classes, but there's an element of support that's needed to support that self-regulation throughout the day. The school day is a series of transitions. So maybe we could look at how to help neurodivergent children regulate repeatedly without exhaustion. So a teacher asked me, how can I help my neurodivergent child stay regulated throughout a full school day without constantly managing their behaviour? They seem to get progressively worse as the day goes on. So what insights can you give us there, Mark?
So this question gets right to the heart of why reactive behavioural management doesn't work for neurodivergent children. Because what the teacher there is describing, the child gets progressively worse as the day goes on, is not a series of separate behavioural incidents. It's a single cumulative process of autonomic fatigue. So what's happening is every transition, every sensory challenge, every social interaction, every moment of suppressing the urge to move, speak, or react, all of it draws on the child's parasympathetic reserves. Like, think of like a battery. Child arrives in the morning with whatever charge they have. And if they've had a meltdown before they left the house, that battery is already running on low. For some children, after a difficult night's sleep, or like I said, stressful morning, the charge is low and every demand across the morning draws even more power from that battery. There's no recharging happening. The school environment does not provide enough parasympathetic recovery to offset that constant demand. Research in 2025 on autonomic fatigue confirms this precisely. Neurodivergent children show measurable parasympathetic depletion, reduced heart rate variability, and elevated cortisol baseline by midday. You know what I mean? By midday. And behavioural incidents peak in the afternoon, sort of between 2 and 3 p.m. Not because something new has gone wrong, but because the reserves are empty. The afternoon behaviour is a symptom of everything that's accumulated since they started at 9 o'clock. The children who push a chair over at 2:15 didn't suddenly become defiant at 2:15. They've been depleting regularly since registration. I think a critical insight for teachers was a study in the UK in 2025 across 30 schools found that neurodivergent children accumulate 2 to 3 times the normal stress load throughout a school day. 2 to 3 times more stress load. One-time intervention, a single regulation session, one visit to the quiet corner showed limited impact because they address a moment, not a pattern. It's like putting a plaster on a broken bone. Like you can see that it's there, but it's not really doing anything to help. The approach that actually works is distributed support, strategic regulation points throughout the day, at times when the nervous system is at its most vulnerable, not waiting for the crisis and then managing, getting ahead of it, proactively trying to reduce the problem. Practically, what that looks like, if we use a frequency-based sound bridge at registration, 2 minutes while the class settles in, then establishes a parasympathetic baseline for the morning, a 90-second transition bridge before each activity change. We've already talked about why that matters, a 5-minute regulation window after morning break or after lunch. These are 2 highest risk transition points because the child is moving from unrestricted high arousal environment back into a structured learning environment, and an afternoon reset around 1:30, 2 o'clock-ish, a brief whole class regulation moment before the final stretch. None of these require individual provision. They benefit every child in the room, not just the neurodiverse children. The data on this approach is really clear. Schools using distributed sensory support throughout the day report a 50% reduction in the afternoon behavioural incidents and a 40% reduction in total teacher behaviour management time, compared to reactive crisis management. 50% fewer afternoon incidents, 40% less time management behaviour. That's hours of time reclaimed actually teaching across a typical week. And the takeaway for you teachers who are listening to this is support early and often, as it's easier to prevent dysregulation than to manage it once it's started. Every 2 minutes you invest in a proactive regulation support can save you 10, 20, 30 minutes of reactive crisis management later. The maths is all there. The research works. And most importantly, the child's nervous system works better when we stop waiting for it to fail and support them before it does.
Mark, thank you. You've made it sound very simple, but also very easy in terms of application. And I think what teachers will take away is that sound isn't something extra to add to an already very full day. It's something that really sits underneath everything else: transitions, focus time, and settling after break, and at the end of the day. So when the sound environment actually supports regulation, then everything else becomes more possible. So if you're an educator listening and you'd like to explore what this could look like in your classroom, then please join us and have a look at HushAway.com. It's a really good starting point for understanding how your children respond. And if you'd like to go deeper, the Sound Sanctuary membership gives you access to over 400 experiences designed for exactly this. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Mark. Your insight into how sound works at a practical level is exactly what classrooms need right now.